Hello, everybody. Welcome. Aloha. I'm Natalie, and this is Life After a Cult. This is a channel where we talk about cult nonsense, expose it, we laugh about the absurdity, and hopefully unbrainwash ourselves in the process. So, look, we all worked for Scientology here. John Atack, me, and also Leah Remini was in the Sea Org, something that I feel like is not talked about a lot.
Mm.
And let me tell you, it was not the spiritual Disneyland that they promised, even for Leah Remini. We signed billion-year contracts. We worked for pennies when we were lucky and got gaslit harder than a Real Housewives reunion because that's Scientology. Today, we're exposing the secrets we were never supposed to talk about until now, and buckle up because this ride involves brainwashing, sleep deprivation, a whole lot of L. Ron Hubbard lies, and the one, the only John Atack.
Hi, Natalie. Wow.
I know that was quite the intro.
You're getting good at this, aren't you?
Welcome, everybody. Thank you, moderators, for being here and everybody in the live chat. And if you're on the replay, hello to you. We want to hear from you. So please do jump in those comments and let me know your guys' thoughts about this. In the live chat, you guys know the drill. Put question or comment in front of your question or comment so it's easier for me to see if it's something you would like us to take up. And I want to kick it off here with making sure people know how to find John Atack. This is his YouTube channel, John Atack Family and Friends. Also on his YouTube channel, and we'll link it, Northern Girls got it linked there, right there, are his links if you want to help support John because he is cranking out the literature. He has more books coming out, and that's how you can do it and how you can I feel like the more we can support John, the faster he can get these books done that we all want. In fact, do you want to give people an update on your latest book and where things are at?
Yeah, I'm doing the footnotes and the illustrations, so we're very close. If Scientology ruled the world, Nazi occultism, sex magic, space aliens, and the second coming. So all the clickbait you could want in just one line.
Or as we call that in Scientology, just a fun Saturday night. Or L. Ron Hubbard would anyways. That's exciting, John. We've been waiting for a new book of yours. You're working on that. You're also working on the Charles Manson book. Kind of, sort of, right?
Well, with Manson, I need somebody with, I need a big publisher because I found out things that nobody has uncovered about Charles Manson, the poster child of serial killers. And I found out 4 areas in his life that have not been commented on properly that actually start to make sense, if you can make sense of something so horrific, of what actually happened and why it happened. But I don't want to, I don't even want to go to agents and publishers because I have been ripped off in the past. So, my proposal actually explains these things.
Yeah.
And after Janet Reitman sort of eviscerated, let's sell these people a piece of blue sky, and wrote Inside Scientology, and which is inaccurate. That was well, actually, not that she sold 250,000 copies and I didn't is annoying. But there's an error on every page, and it's only 110 pages long. My book's 400 pages long, and there are not many errors. Scientology, in fact, when they dead agented my book, there were 60 things that they complained about. 57 of them are answered in the text. He says Scientology was banned in the state of Victoria. Fact. And it's like, yeah, it's chronological, pal. If you just keep on going, you'll find where he says they lifted the ban. But there are only 3 things that they complained about, and they were all things that Vicky Asnaran, who was the Inspector General of the Religious Technology Centre, had said in sworn affidavits. And she then, of course, received a cash payment and declared herself a perjurer. And I decided she was, in fact, telling the truth in the first place.
Yeah, makes sense.
There you go.
Jersey Jan is a great question for John. How does the new book differ from Let's Sell Them a Piece of Blue Sky?
Let's sell these people a piece of blue sky.
Let's sell these people.
Yeah, sorry about that. Pedantic of me. Yeah, completely and absolutely. That was a book about the history of Hubbard and Scientology and the many contradictions in Hubbard's ideas. And I'm amazed. It came out in 1990, the original. The current version is updated. It's unabridged. It has 100 passages in it that were not in the original, which we weren't allowed to put in the original because US law was a little bit funny at the time about quoting from harassment orders and journals and private letters. They're all back in there. But that's what that is. I also wrote Scientology, the Cult of Greed, which is for people who've never had the misfortune to be involved with Scientology, to show some of the very worst things in L. Ron Hubbard's own elegant style. This book takes the thought experiment, which is, what would the world be like if Scientology took it over, if policy was used everywhere? And it was, why didn't I think of this before? Why didn't somebody think of this before? Because it's a horrifying idea.
That sounds scary and unsettling.
And that something that when I left, very soon after I left Scientology, I left in 1983, a long time ago. Very soon after I left, I read The Morning of the Magicians by Pouls and Bergier, which is bullshit, and I don't recommend it. But they're floating these things about the Nazis having all this occult stuff going on. And I got interested. And then I read they wrote 2 other books. I read them. There's a guy called Ravenscroft who wrote The Spear of Destiny, which is nonsense. And then eventually a professor called Nicholas Goodrick Clark, he's right here, actually. I keep him. To the side of thing, wrote this book, which is actually does tell you. And since then, there have been a few other books, and one of which points out that Hitler had this book in his library, annotated. There are 60 annotations made by Hitler. And so there's all this stuff about, well, okay, I 40 years have been looking at this, that there are parallels in his sadly still unpublished autobiography, The Telling of Me by Me. L. Ron Hubbard Jr., Nibs, who was, I found a quotation from his father this week, which is still oddly in the technical volumes, saying that L. Ron Hubbard Jr. was one of the best auditors in the world. But a year or 2 later, his father started harassing him seriously. But for 7 years, he was the second in command, and probably the only person who really got anywhere near Ron Hubbard. I mean, closer than Mary Sue, I think, because he started initiating him in the Crowley-like magic, which, of course, we were not really told anything about. And
no, we were not. That was very much kept on the down low from Scientologists. We were told something totally different, that he rescued a young maiden from the sex occultists.
Yeah. And when the young maiden had a baby, who looks rather like him, he ultimately had his harassment people, the Guardian's Office, write a letter on a single-use typewriter. This is a method that was used where they would go to a thrift store, buy a typewriter, that one letter would be done, then it would be trashed. So that nobody could trace, because you can actually trace individual typewriters, the face, so that nobody would be able to trace this letter. He dictated a letter in 1971 that was sent to Alexis Valerie Hollister, as she would have been.
So that was the daughter of L. Ron Hubbard with Sarah.
In June 1951, he dedicated the first edition of Science of Survival to Alexis Valerie Hubbard. But in 1971, 20 years later, he wrote to her, or had her written to, on a single-use typewriter, so nobody could trace the letter back to him, saying she wasn't actually his child, that he'd taken pity on her mother when she was pregnant and taken her in. The fact that he'd actually been living with her mother for 4 years by this time, because he stole her from the magician Jack Parsons in 1946. But so he actually disowned her. And then when he died, I think I'm right, she was given $40,000 to just never say anything about this again. It's very interesting. I think even Diana is no longer involved, I'm being told. So none of his 7 children.
Wait, back it up. Diana Hubbard no longer involved in what?
I've heard nothing about her being involved for some time now. I mean, if somebody else has other information, but
In Scientology?
in Scientology, she was the last of the children. Arthur
Yeah.
is out. Quentin killed himself. Suzette is out. I think Katie Gillespie is perhaps not with us anymore. That's the second daughter, the second child, I should say. He had 2 children by his first marriage, didn't tell his second wife that he was already married, didn't tell her that he had 2 children, didn't tell her that he hadn't paid anything in child support for them by the time they met, and despite court orders, and published books about the second dynamic and how to have a family and be a... There are certain contradictions in Scientology. So anyway, this book is about the occult roots of Nazism and how they are the same roots. Because in this manuscript, Nibs said his father got the magic from the same guy who gave it to Hitler. Now, so I've been exploring that thought. So it's 10 years since I first read the Nibs manuscript.
Yeah.
And while there is no evidence that that is true, it is true to say that there is a common source for Nazi Aryan race theory and Scientology. There's one man that it goes through. And I've traced all of that back. I've found out, the crazy idea of Aryan race theory and where that went. And I'm kind of putting forward the argument that if Scientology took the world over, it would be deeply unpleasant. And the essential thing is that where the Nazis spent all of this time trying to prove that they were a distinct racial stock, the Aryans, which is complete, abject and utter nonsense, which I do deconstruct in the book. What they managed to prove, and nobody's really made much of a noise about this, but the Nazis did do a mass of work over the 12 years they were in power to measure racial types. And in the end, they couldn't differentiate Nordic from Mediterranean from Jewish at all. It was complete failure, all of that work.
Wow.
Because you can't, because it's nonsense, because there is, in fact, only one race of human beings. And the unfortunate thing is that the only difference between human beings is hair color, skin color, and eye color. The rest on the inside, so race is skin deep, you might say. We're all related. Our DNA proves that we're all related. But they had this great quest to find this thing. The equivalent for Scientology is this mad OT8 bulletin, Operating Thetan Level 8, Section 8, which is the highest you can go in Scientology. It's about half an inch above the carpet, actually. That's the highest you can go in Scientology. It's not very high at all, really. But there was, for a week, when this was first released in 1988, aboard the Freewinds, their cruise liner, there was a bulletin at the start of it that was carefully withdrawn after a week. And this bulletin had already leaked, and we know it's genuine because Scientology sued to get it back when it leaked. They confirmed that it was genuine. If they just let it go, nobody would have believed it. Because in this bulletin, Hubbard says that he's working alongside Lucifer and the Antichrist to prevent the second coming of Christ, because the second coming of Christ will be the Markabian landing. He also predicts that he will be coming back. All this stuff about him going off to the stars and what have you. No, in the OT8 bulletin, he says that he will be coming back, but as a politician this time. I think he's a body thetan of a certain famous politician at the moment, but we won't get into that.
So L. Ron Hubbard said he was going to come back, but
to stop the second coming of Christ, to stop Christianity. And he says in this bulletin, this is the real purpose of Scientology. I'm pretty sure this is genuine because there's a reference in this bulletin to when he first became aware of this idea. And he dates it at 1945. That's when he met
John,
Jack Parsons.
Why wouldn't he just tell people? Why not just start off being like, hey, here's the deal. If Jesus comes back, I think we're going to be invaded by these aliens known as the Markabians. So here's Scientology. We're actually going to stop. We're going to we're going to work with the Antichrist. Like, why not just be upfront about it? Instead, there's no one in Scientology that I'm aware of or I have ever met that knew it had anything to do with black magic, let alone, trying to bring about the Antichrist. Nobody that I've ever met and known in Scientology would be sticking around if they knew that was true.
Well, there are some exceptions to that. In 1969, an Australian journalist called Alexander Mitchell published a piece in the Sunday Times in London in which he had discovered the connection between Ron Hubbard and Jack Parsons, and that they tried to summon the Antichrist. They tried to bring about the end days. And that was the goal in January to March 46. That's what Hubbard was doing. And when Mitchell's article came out, Scientology forced an apology. They basically went to the Sunday Times and said, it's going to cost you a lot of money in court if you don't. So they retracted, and they printed Scientology's retraction, which is a fabulous thing. It's in a piece of Blue Sky, which says L. Ron Hubbard broke up black magic in America. So rather than saying I had nothing to do with it, it's admitted that he was involved with Jack Parsons, but he broke up black magic in America. Of course, he didn't.
No.
It's still going one way and another. So, yeah, you've got this amazing situation where Scientologists, I did meet, I can think of 3 people that I met who got into Scientology because they knew it was Crowley-like magic.
Whoa.
One of them was the OT5 case supervisor at St. Hill.
What?
Yep.
Wow. There were like black magic people amongst us in Scientology, or at least a few who at one point who did know about this, like that one person.
Yeah. I mean, the first time I encountered this, and I had no idea about any of this, and I really didn't look into it until after I left. But I was living down in East Grinstead doing the academy levels, auditor training courses. And this guy called Carlos, I met him and I invited him back to the apartment I had with my partner. And he sat down and he said, John, what Hubbard is doing is he's gathering together the majors.
The majors.
The magicians.
Oh, mages.
Yeah,
like
mages. Magi.
Magi.
Magus sisters.
Female can be a magi. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, magi, magician, magus, all of that sort of stuff. What Hubbard is doing, he said, he's gathering us all together. And he said, John, you're one as well. I was like, oh, that's news to me. That's very nice. But most of the people in Scientology, they're just dross. They're just plebs. They're just hoi polloi. They're worthless. But Hubbard is trying to find us. And then he told me that he'd been in Scientology when he'd seen the Alexander Mitchell article. So this was about 7 years later, in the 76, I think. Mm-hmm. And he'd seen the Alexander Mitchell article and decided he wanted to get into Crowley. He found that Crowley had been a heroin addict. And this might be a bit of an answer to why didn't Hubbard make it public what he was doing. Crowley ended up a junkie and bankrupt, whereas Hubbard ended up a junkie and alcoholic with $648 million in the bank. All of it taken from Scientologists. He had no other source of income. So you've got this situation where this guy finds out about Crowley and he decides that to follow Crowley's path, he's got to become a heroin addict. And that's what he did. He went off, became a heroin addict for a while, and then came back to Scientology. And I never saw him again. But that was the only time this thing came up. So he was right. Well, he was right in as much as Hubbard really was profoundly involved with Aleister Crowley. I have a paper that you can find online, or it's on my YouTube channel, called Possible Origins for Dianetics and Scientology. And there's this wonderful guy, Jeff Jacobson, who wrote a thing called The Hubbard is Bare, where he showed that there were many ideas in Scientology that exist elsewhere. What I wanted to do was to prove that Hubbard knew where he was taking them from. And so I found 120 ideas in Scientology, Hubbard talking about the person, who'd come up with it and linked the things together. And fully 60 of those things came directly from Aleister Crowley. Things like the birth engram, past lives, the magical memory, OTTR0, that comes directly from Crowley. And the whole concept of intention, of will, of controlling others is, of course, fundamental to magic, and very much the idea of Scientology. You'll be able to leave your body and you'll be able to control things by intention. That's it. The
That's it.
rest's all window dressing.
Just some good Aleister Crowley there.
Yeah.
Deanna Ross has a question for you. Will you be posting more videos of Getting Clear?
Yeah, it is my intention. It'll be 10 years in June since this came out.
And for people who might not know, can you fill them in on what Getting Clear is?
Yeah, in June 2015 in Toronto, we had a 5-day conference where we had, I think, 27 speakers. And we recorded in high resolution with a production crew, 4 cameras. And things kind of went financially badly wrong. Firstly, there was a very public attack upon me, saying, how dare we charge money for tickets to this conference.
How dare you? How dare you?
And I won't get into the details of that, but the woman who made that attack later tried to sell a book of news clippings for £50 a copy. So there you go. What was perhaps not understood was that I wasn't organizing this thing. It was being organized by Professor Jim Beverly, and things fell through. He was a professor of Christian thought and ethics at a seminary, and Tyndale. And he thought that they would give him rooms for people to stay in and a conference hall. And at the last minute, they said no. And I said, we can't do this, Jim. This is not going to work. And he insisted. And so he ended up hiring the Sheraton Hotel conference room, paying for people to have rooms, paying for air flights, when there was no way. So he ended up hugely out of pocket.
Yeah,
I didn't get paid. I was meant to get $3,000 for the week. I didn't get paid. It cost me money to go. And then you got this thing where it had started out that he said to me a year and a half before when he started arranging this, he said, John, everybody's ripped you off. You've done all of these things. And your publisher, when Blue Sky went bestseller, number 98 out of 4 million books on Amazon, they didn't pay the royalties. He said, so everybody's ripped you off. I'm going to make sure that you make some money, and I'm going to set this conference up. I didn't get paid. And at the end of it, because he desperately needed to try and make his retirement money back, because he'd spent everything doing this. Lovely man.
wow.
He said, going to have to sell the videos. And I was this was meant to be me finishing off and winding all this up. So he sold, I think, about 100 copies of them. So it's 10 years. I've decided they'll all be released. We're putting them into our Patreon. There are several already in there, and we will gradually release them from there. But when we did it, with the people we had, Hannah Whitfield, Jerry Armstrong, Tony Ortega, Paulette Cooper, Nan McLean, who was not on the bill, and Nan turned up, and I was this is the bravest person in the world. I mean, Paulette's incredibly brave, but Nan she had no support, and she took them on in the 70s. And she was 92 years old, and we got her on stage. So she's there. She's brilliant because she was there, and she said she lived about an hour's drive away, and she said, I can't stay over because I've got to get home to get my medical cannabis. Things ex-Scientologists do. I don't know.
Exactly.
She was absolutely brilliant. So that's what it is. And yeah, they're available. And I have something to say about this, that I've spent a lot of time trying to understand Scientology. What is the history? And it's like a disease, that if you're really going to understand a disease, you need the etiology. And that's not the study of extraterrestrials but that's not even funny, is it? Etiology. God, John, where do you come up with these things? You have to understand the history of a disease. You have to understand the stages of it. I think too many people are not healed from Scientology because they've tried to just grab hold, and they'll read autobiographies, which are very worthy and very important, but you don't get the picture of who Hubbard was, what he was up to, and the amazing, this is the most fascinating man of the 20th century. Nobody has a better story than Ron Hubbard. This spotty little fat ginge who created a religion that that netted him actually more than $1 billion, enslaved thousands, and still has fanatical believers. And
Yeah.
there is no substance whatsoever in Scientology. It's stolen from other people. Of course, you'll occasionally get wins, because you will.
Yeah.
Hypnotism can do that to people. It can make people feel very euphoric, get very good indicators. But so you've got this amazing story. I fear that most people who've been through Scientology, it is such an elaborate form of mind control, of thought reform. How would you know if you've been brainwashed? How would you actually know if you've been brainwashed? There isn't a way of knowing it. This is better than the Chinese system. This is better than the Russian system. This is better than MK Ultra. They didn't come close, because when you leave Scientology, it's self-reinforcing. The language and those weird concepts will keep on going until you challenge and deal with them. I was talking with Jefferson Hawkins the other week, and he's the only person I know who's running a group of ex-members where they talk about whether any of it's true or not.
Oh, fun.
So they take up a principle like the ARC triangle and they talk about it. And I'm like, yeah, I tried to get that going back in 1993 in East Grinstead, and people are like, yeah, we don't care really. We just want to bitch about it. That's what we want to do. So
there's a combination in there somewhere where I think it's the right amount of working on yourself and doing the work that can help you heal from Scientology. And there's also a good amount of bitching that needs to go along with it. But to your point, though, I get it. It's not getting stuck in it. It's an interesting point how healing works when it comes to something like Scientology. It's such an ongoing process. And just when, in my experience, I thought, oh, this is so much better. And then something in life happens and it stirs something up. And I realize, whoa, there's some Scientology still sitting there. I need to take a look at that. So I think that's great that Jeff Hawkins is doing that, because to be able to freely speak about concepts in Scientology as far as their workability in a safe space, I can see how that would be helpful. Because like you said earlier, even a blind squirrel finds a nut. There are some things that were helpful because that's the stuff that L. Ron Hubbard stole from somebody else.
And it's part of a system that is designed to enslave people. So the fact that it makes you feel high, it's when I had lots of questions when the first year after I left, I had these long conversations with other members, because there were things you couldn't, you'd be reported to ethics if you'd asked, what OT abilities did you actually develop? None. Never met anybody yet. I've met more than 1,000 Scientologists. So, and what was the point of conviction for you? Where did you go, oh wow, this stuff really works? And it would usually be book one auditing, which of course Hubbard had declared illegal in 1951 because it is hypnotic. They're his words. Wrote a paper called Never Believe a Hypnotist, where you have lots of his statements which explain that Scientology is absolutely and thoroughly a hypnotic practice. It's right there. And he says you can't be a good auditor unless you understand hypnotism. How many auditors have you met who have the vaguest idea what hypnotism is?
Yeah,
it's
none.
None.
It was never part of it. No, it was never part of the discussion. Another question, I'll just grab a couple of these so we don't fall too far behind. Rod saying, John, would you consider doing your own regular live Q&A on your channel? Appreciate you and your knowledge.
Well, thank you very much, Rod. I'm doing that with you, Natalie. That's
right. This is where you're getting your John ATAC. But I think that's a good thing, though. And eventually, I'm sure, too, it'd be neat to do an Ask John ATAC, Ask Me Anything kind of thing.
But as it is, I'm here and, I'm very comfortable working with you and you get to read the questions. So I don't even have to read the questions, so.
That's right. That's right. This is that version of it. Jersey Jan wants to know, if we haven't read the first book yet, would you say we should go on to the new one or read both? So you have Let's Sell Them a Piece of Blue Sky. And then you have the new book, which is the title again is what?
If Scientology ruled the world.
If Scientology ruled the world. So does the first one have to be read, or can someone go straight to If Scientology Ruled the World?
If Scientology ruled the world is a general book. It's for absolutely anybody, and you can start from nowhere. If you're a former member, I wrote Blue Sky, and believe me, I went through hell to get this thing done, because it's only Lerma before the net and safety in numbers. There was John Atack, and I was just harassed daily for 16 years. It was absolutely awful. So I did that because I understood that this stuff really gets inside you. It really does take over the way people think.
Yeah.
And as you say, you can be walking along the street one day and go, oh, where did that come from? Why am I thinking that? So the idea with Blue Sky was to, by understanding Hubbard and the many lies and contradictions, Russell Miller, I worked with Russell on Barefaced Messiah. I would very much say, if you've been through Scientology, read Blue Sky, and it should make a difference. Jesse Prince told me that it took him 6 years before he could open the cover. He was so phobic about what might be in there. And then he said, I read it 3 times, and everybody should read it 3 times, because there's a lot of material in there. So the 2 books are quite independent of each other.
Yeah.
But I recommend read them both at least twice, and buy 25 copies each for all of your friends.
Yeah. That's right. And then book club back here at my place, we'll go through it. I wanted to touch on a little bit of, we're talking about being on staff and actually working for Scientology. And Leah Remini, who's been an outspoken critic and truth teller about Scientology since she left, her story is very interesting. And a part of it that I feel like doesn't get talked about a lot was her time in the Sea Organization. She was actually a Sea Org member. And there's an article I just want to read a part of and kind of get your reaction and take on it. It was from Glamour magazine. And it says this is when she was a member of the Sea Organization as a child. Remini was forced to steal food as a teenage Sea Org member because she was hungry, and Scientology made her pay for it years later. I gave this up as a transgression, and my auditor asked how much I thought I owed to make up the damage for the food I stole 20 years earlier. So it's not uncommon, especially in the Sea Organization, because if you're not being paid, you don't have money for snacks, and you get hungry outside of meals. So it seems like she was stealing some food, and the auditor's like, okay, how much do you think it was? And she says, well, I don't know. I said, how much was custard and hamburgers for 3 months in the 80s? Well, let's just round it up to 40,000. Okay. I was dumbfounded. But I was also trying to get onto my operating Thetan levels. So I paid the church $40,000 for this transgression.
That's a lot of custard and hamburgers.
That is a lot of custard and hamburgers. And I'm looking at that, and that's such a great example of what happens, to children who aren't being taken care of, which is basically any child in the Sea Organization, as she was. And she didn't even have enough food, had food insecurity, and was stealing food just to get by. My sister was in the Sea Org at 14. She went to the international base, and she was in a similar situation where she just wanted like a Gatorade. It was hot. It was in the desert. She was feeling dehydrated. So she took some change from a room she was cleaning. I think it belonged to the commanding officer of the Commodore's Messenger Org. So she picked the wrong person to take from, and she did get in trouble. But these staff members in Scientology, you were a Scientology staff member. I was a Scientology staff
I wasn't.
Oh, that's right. You were a Scientologist, but not on staff.
I was a customer, or what's called public.
That's right. You were a public.
I ran the renovations of the Manchester Deansgate building. I think I was 6 weeks the renovations in charge there for my house building skills, and but that was my only staff experience.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that when I left, I couldn't understand why nobody dared speak out about this thing. And at
Yeah.
first I thought, well, it's because their confessions might, the odd sexual things they've done might be made public. And then you kind of go, it's not just that. It's that they're scared shitless because of the abuse and humiliation, the trauma bonding that they experience. Just absolutely dreadful. And I was kind of going, and it took me a while to kind of go, oh, because I'm a writer, an artist, a musician, they treated me as a celebrity. I got got some heavy regging, where I remember a 13-hour interview with neither food nor drink, but I still turned down the check at the end of it and said, I don't want to pay 30% a year interest. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
But so I had this charmed life, which allowed me to absorb Scientology without understanding any of the harassment stuff that was going on. I didn't know anything about that, or any of the mistreatment of Sea Organization people. And when I left, the main reason that I kept on talking, because I was an artist, I was having shows, I had another life, and I just became, this was all I did for a very long time. Because at first I felt ashamed that I'd not seen the treatment that was being given to people, particularly in the Sea Organization, the Rehabilitation Project Force. I felt ashamed, and that I needed to do something to pay back, my ignorance in that situation. And then about 3 weeks later, when I paid that back, it just kept on going, But yeah, I mean, Leah was 13 years old when her mother put her into the Sea Organization, and that kind of gets in the way of her education.
Yeah.
I'm on good terms with Janice Gillum Grady, who I think is an absolutely remarkable human being.
Yeah, Janice will be on the channel. We finally got ourselves scheduled. We scheduled and we had to reschedule because I went out of town and she was gone. But in May, after I get back from Hawaii, Janice is going to be on the channel, and I'm so excited to talk to her.
Yeah, and she's written, is it 3 books now, Commodore's Messenger? And she was 11 years old when she and her 2 older siblings, found themselves on Hubbard's ship. And Hubbard had managed, her parents had split up, and Hubbard managed to keep, and her mum was the famous Yvonne Gillum, the founder of the Celebrity Center in Los Angeles, the first celebrity center, and a delightful woman who everybody loved. But Hubbard had managed to get her kids away from her, and they became the first Commodore's messengers, those 3 children. So at the age of 12, instead of having an education and a childhood, Janice was, in her own terms, part of a slave ship. And that's sort of the treatment of children, the idea that because you've lived forever, or at least 1.25 quadrillion years, you don't need to learn anything. You don't need an education.
Yeah.
And you don't need a childhood. You don't.
Oh, why do you need a childhood? And you think about how long ago that was on the ship with Janice and what happened to her and her family. And then you go into the 80s and you've got Leah Remini having to steal food to get enough food as a child in the Sea Organization. And then you move forward a little more. And when I was in the Sea Org, my sister was 14 at the international base without enough in terms of food and, Gatorade, things like that, where it was really hot. It doesn't change every generation throughout Scientology. It is the same story at a different time, but there are key pieces of it that I thought you could shed light on too, on maybe where some of that comes from. Like why mistreat or have the children there as staff members when, how do you not see that could be a problem? I think of Daniel Chamberlain. What was she, 12? And on the ship with no adult, nobody, just her without her parents.
Well, the Gillum children,
Yeah, exactly.
they were just abandoned with him. And there is something deeply sinister when you look at the pictures. Most of the Commodore's messengers were girls.
True.
they were dressed up in white hot pants and little white tops. There are photographs you can see, and you're kind of going, in this day and age, 50 years later, we look at that and you go, there's somebody who is profoundly sexually
You would
perverted.
never let a teenage girl walk around like that without her parents. They would wear these like crop tops where they tie them up, so it would show their midriff, and they'd wear these short shorts. They were like
hot pants.
Hot pants. Is that what they're called?
That's what they were called. Yeah. And there's, there's, I mean, talk with Janice about this, but they were his servants, and I'm, he did try and kiss her sister, who was about 13 at the time.
What? I'm not familiar with this story.
Yeah, ask her. I mistakenly thought it was her and wrote something about it, and she came to me and said, no, it was my sister.
He tried to kiss her sister, who was 13.
Yeah.
So what happened?
She said no. And but you just never know with this guy. You find out the things that he did and got away with. And so he was able to control and shame people. So I personally think that he had been he'd been promiscuous. Let's put it that way. Second marriage was bigamous, but before he ended the second marriage, he was already shacking up with Barbara Cloden in 1950. There's a great interview with her, which was done by for a documentary called The Secret Life of L. Ron Hubbard. And the producer, because I was the advisor to this thing, consultant to this thing, at the end, she said, here are all of the recordings we did. Now, of course, what you get is 2 minutes in the documentary, but here are half-hour recordings with all of these people. And one of them was Barbara Cloden, who she was living with Hubbard in 1950 in Los Angeles. And one day he said, you've got to get out. You've got to get out. My wife's coming. He proposed to her. Tony Ortega found a proposal to a woman called Anne Shelton. Not just a proposal, he took out a marriage license. When I interviewed the world's first real clear, John McMaster, he said that as he toured around the world, he found all of these women would come with these little red-haired babies.
No.
Oh.
Okay, here's the thing. Maybe it's because he was a cult leader, but I look back, and maybe it was back in the day. I'm like, L. Ron Hubbard was not the most attractive man. So do you think it's that cult leader kind of mojo, and that's too why so many people just followed him onto the ship, and then again as Scientology staff members and Sea Org members?
Yeah, and there is a shift in his the way he's seen with the Sea Org. And of course, the whole idea of the Sea Org was that it wasn't safe for him to be on land because he'd be arrested.
Yeah.
So, there'd been two inquiries in Australia, one in Canada, one in South Africa, one in what is now Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, and one in the UK. And they all, basically, they're remarkable documents when you look at them because they're just quoting L. Ron Hubbard. They're just saying, he said, this is how to do a noisy investigation, never defend, always attack, if possible, ruin him utterly, these wonderful scriptural ideas of Ron Hubbard. And so he thought, well, if I'm in international waters, nobody can arrest me. And the status that he suddenly achieved with the Sea Project, what would soon become the Sea Organization in 1968, that status was just that charisma. And it's like, you join a rock band and, even Keith Richards got laid, can you imagine that?
That's true too. I guess it's that same kind of thing, because I look at Keith Richards and I'm like, Mick Jagger. Even back in the day, I'm like, I don't know, but it must be that whole cult leader vibe.
Well, the Bernard Fowler, who has sung with the Rolling Stones for 40 years now, and he's not on any of the albums, but he actually is in the band. And he said, when you're driving to the gig, they're just these guys. When you go on the stage, they're gods. Wow. And it is that charisma that is gifted. I was sat in a cafe in Birmingham, and this guy came in and started talking to me, and he said, Scientology. Hubbard said, I was in the Navy and we boarded his ship at one point in the Mediterranean. What a horrible man.
Is that what he said about L. Ron Hubbard?
Yeah, and it seemed to be that it was either one way or the other, that you got the stink of his bad breath because his teeth were rotting in his head because he was terrified of dentists and doctors, of course. Yeah, he had a sebaceous cyst the size of a baseball on his forehead, and he wouldn't go to a doctor about it. So when you look at those Sea Org pictures, I talked with Maud Castillo, who was the photographer who took many of those onboard photos. She said, have you noticed that the cap's always pulled down?
Yeah.
He's covering this great lump. And there are photos taken in Queens at the beginning of 1973 when he was on the run because he thought the French were going to arrest him. He stayed in an apartment with Paul Preston and Jim Dincalci. And Jim took some photos of him. I've used 2 of them in Scientology Cult of Greed. And you can see the lump. You know, this aged, he was only 60, 61 years old. And yet he's wrecked. You know, he's this overweight sort of, and again, what is the charm in this? And it's the charisma that we give to authority. It's the way that rich people never have to pay for anything, you know, because people are like, oh yeah, I'll look after them and maybe they'll look after me. They won't. Don't let them get away with it. Don't buy a Tesla. You know?
Linda Lou, did the girls dress that way in the 70s? If so, was that very common? I mean, I think they did dress that way in the 70s, but the point is, this is supposed to be this religious group.
Yeah, and we're also talking about fashions, you know, that are there for 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds, what have you. And he's got 12-year-olds dressed this way, and they're helping him when he has a shower. Now, I think that what happened is that he was promiscuous and a little bit weird, according to his son. He liked to cut women with razor blades and stuff like that. You know, we've all got a, oh God. He'd give them a cocktail of an upper and a downer. So they'd be completely unconscious. They'd have no memory of what happened to them. And they wake up with these marks on them, according to his son.
According to his son,
yeah.
L. Ron Hubbard would drug women and then cut them with razor blades while they were
tie them up and
tie them up.
Yeah. So he had a strange, you know, who knows? There are a variety of stories. I mean, the worst stories are about him raping a 12-year-old boy in Morocco. A witness affidavit that. Who knows if it's true? But, you know, a 12-year-old rent boy in Morocco. And the very worst story, and I'll tell you exactly where I got this from. This was from Ellen Jones. Ellen Jones was Mark Jones's wife. Mark had been had commanded a wing of the US Air Force in Korea, which is not something to boast about, frankly. Bloody awful what happened there, but we won't get into that. He was a senior officer. They both became very friendly with Hubbard. They went to the ship. She was a Class 8 auditor. By the time I knew her, and she was just great. She was just great. Just one of those people, you know, the real spark, really bright. She'd written 2 best-selling novels. In fact, I knew her as she was writing the first one, but there were 2 bestsellers, historical novels about England under Stephen and Maud, and then during the reign of Henry II, so in the 1100s. And she'd done all the research to find all this stuff out. She was really, really bright woman. And what had happened was that she was a case supervisor at Los Angeles. I don't know whether it was the Advanced Organization or the St. Hill, but she was there. And a woman who had audited Ron Hubbard had come in for a session, really freaked out about what had happened. And there it was. And Ellen left Scientology the moment she saw this. Mark carried on as an independent. Ellen just went, I don't want, and she knew Hubbard quite well. I don't want anything to do with this, because what this woman said was that Ron Hubbard had an upset, what is called an ARC break in Scientology. He had an upset because Mary Sue Hubbard, his wife, his third wife, remember he had no second wife, his third wife was auditing him, and she'd got up and left the room. And that's a violation of the auditor's code. The auditor must stay in control. And he was really angry that she'd done this. And then it came out what he'd said to her. And what he'd said to her was that he'd raped one of their children at the age of 14. I'm not going to name the child. Other people have done. And Ellen looked at it and went, "This is true. I'm gone."
Whoa.
And since then, I've actually heard another independent source on that story. And you kind of, that can't be true. John, you must be making these stories up. No, everything you think is true and positive about Scientology, the opposite is true. And the Aleister Crowley connection, one of the things that Crowleyites and black dark magicians do is they commit improprieties. They do things that go against the moral codes, the ethics of the society around them. And if you want something that really goes against all of my moral codes, then raping your children is pretty high on the list. So
let's use the R word moving forward, because you've said it a few times, and YouTube starts short. They will limit the video for how many people see it, and it's a good message to get out there. So you can say R or SA. To appease the YouTube gods.
Let's just say euphemism at this point. He committed a euphemism.
That is so. It's just so insane how Scientology has fairly successfully managed to cover up so much of this over the years. If you think about the sheer number of different staff members or members of the Sea organization, and how even after L. Ron Hubbard was gone, when he died, then it became the era of David Miscavige, and how a lot of those abusive practices, all of them, they continue on in terms of Scientology practices. But the people who knew, I mean, do you think it's just the people who knew L. Ron Hubbard and knew the truth? They're either gone, or it's been so long, and Scientology's done this whole dog and pony dance about how L. Ron Hubbard is so great. I mean, they're doing it now with David Miscavige. They're doing video after video about how great David Miscavige is. He said hi to me and he knew my name. I want to make sure I don't miss this from Martha. Aloha. Thank you for being a member for a month. And she says, tell Natalie about your conference in Toronto.
Well, getting clear of Scientology 10 years ago this June.
Okay. So that's what the other,
which we talked about a little at the start here. So maybe she wasn't with us at that point. But the idea was to fully air what we knew about Hubbard. So we had Jerry Armstrong, who'd collected the archive, and if I've remembered rightly, Jerry had collected 600,000 items. He started with 22 boxes of Hubbard material that had been following Hubbard round the globe since the early 1950s. Wherever he traveled, these 22 boxes would be shipped. They included his baby boots. They included he'd got this little trick where if he saw any stationery loose, he'd steal it. And so he'd got one of the most famous one is his separation order from the Navy. And there's one that Scientology showed to people, and I did manage in the end to get a copy of it. They don't like it being copied, which shows him having 22 medals, right? Great war hero. Now, the real one that's in the Navy file shows that he just got the routine service medals for being in, you got the Atlantic medal if you were that side of the country, the Pacific medal if you were that side. Yeah. That's all he got. But what he'd done was he'd stolen a blank separation order, typed in what he wanted, and you can tell it's a forgery because it's got purple hearts on it, and it's got the wrong award. I can't remember whether it's palms or something, but it oak leaf cluster or what have you. It's got the wrong award. It's not actually something that was ever issued, so it's a fake. But he'd accumulate these things and get these things. Jerry had all of this. Is in the magic ceremonies. I don't know whether we talked about the blood ritual, but I've seen the blood ritual. Omar Garrison, who was paid $280,000 not to publish the authorized biography of L. Ron Hubbard, came and showed me the handwritten blood ritual where Hubbard dedicated his life and his bigamous second wife Sarah's life to the goddess Hathor, who's the destroyer of mankind, called Babylon, the whore of Babylon in the am I allowed to say whore in the Revelation, the euphemism of Babylon, described in the Bible, which is a book we're not allowed to quote because it's got nasty things in it. So we had Jerry there. We had Hannah Whitfield, who was with Hubbard, I think, from 1963, and right through the 70s. We had Jesse Prince, who was there in the 80s. So we had people who were insiders, and Jesse, I remember him talking about every week they had to send the stats to Hubbard, and they still came in boxes, so bankers' boxes of all of the statistics of all of the organizations printed out so that Hubbard could every week go through them, talk about micro control. And every week somebody would be sent to the Rehabilitation Project Force by Hubbard, whoever had signed the docket for this. So David Miscavige apparently wasn't very keen on Jesse Prince. And so he went, "Oh, this is going to be your job this week." He's like, "I'm going to get you busted." And Jesse was like, "Oh, what do I do about this?" He was like, "I know what I'll do. I won't sign the thing with my name. I'll just send them to him." And he got a commendation from Hubbard. And the commendation said that Jesse had understood that the ink in the pens contains rose perfume, which is what the psychs are using to brainwash us all and to destroy all life in the universe. This is the guy that created Scientology. He was mad as a hatter by the end.
Wow. What did Jesse think about that? Do you know?
Well, he was pleased he didn't get sent to the RPF.
Yeah.
But Jesse's talks that he gave, I think 2 talks, and they were just phenomenal. He's great on a stage. He's just got that real natural charisma. And the stories he had to tell, Hubbard didn't realize that Jesse was black. And what had happened was he said, "Right, I want you to appoint the auditor with the most well-done auditing hours as whatever the pompous title was that Jesse had, Supreme Galactic Leader of Tech or whatever."
Yeah.
And so Jesse gets the job. I think he was in Chicago, and it's like, "Right, you've got the most, so come to the Int Base and you're now the boss of all of this stuff."
Yeah.
And Hubbard decided he wanted to see who he'd appointed. And so Jesse was told he had to stand on one of the planters in a parking lot. I think probably an underground park. I don't know. Why would you have planters in an underground parking lot?
Yeah.
Standing on this planter waiting, and this limousine pulls in front, this caddy or what have you, and the window goes down, and he sees the shocked look on the old man's face because nobody had said he was black. And of course, there aren't many black people in Scientology. It's kind of racist, So, but yeah, he got lots of great stories, and there, we had lots of other people there. And I think, my boast at the time was that anybody that watched all of these lectures, all of these talks, Scientology would be finished for them. There was no way that they'd be able to maintain belief in Scientology after watching them. Please go out and do the experiment for me. Watch them all 28 hours of them. And if you still want to do Scientology after that, then you can change your name to Andy Nolch.
Who's that?
Andy is he's an Australian guy who runs a channel. He came to me and he said, "Oh, mate, you've taught me out of Scientology. I'm going to wind up my channel. I want to do the last show with you because that seems right." I've been told by Australians that I ought to impersonate them, by the way, that they don't feel insulted. I was told off for saying I'm not going to impersonate them. So that's why I'm doing it. And he said he was a half Scientologist. And then there are 3 shows with him, all done within about 2 weeks because he was desperate to have this thing done. And then he turned on me and did this video attacking me. So my personal favorite video on my channel is my response to that.
Oh, that's
we
funny.
took every statement he'd made And in this whole ramble, there are only 3 things he criticized me for. The rest is all about, there's no global warming. I've been down in Melbourne and the water level's always the same. You're going, Andy, they don't have tides in Melbourne.
Yeah.
So that's a bit whack. And he's homophobic and he's all sorts of stuff. And everybody's in the CIA. He keeps writing and telling, every now and then I'll get something, and he's bound to watch this now. That I'll get something telling me, particularly Karen de la Carrière and Jeffrey Augustine, they're in the CIA apparently, and I should watch out for them. And it's like, why? Why would I care? Still there it goes.
It is. It makes sense to me, I guess, that when you go back to the beginning and strip it all down and realize that we're talking about L. Ron Hubbard, who is into black magic, all of the creepy things. Mm. And he starts this Sea organization, uses children in it, puts young girls in hot pants and crop tops. And then as the Sea Org evolves, the uniform did get long, like the shorts got longer. I do remember that. In fact, by the time Leah Remini became a member of the Sea organization, there's a photo of her floating around in the white uniform. So I don't know if she was a member of the Commodore's Messenger Org or that was the uniform for flag at the time. But there's this ongoing, again, like this history and these stories that are known that, like I was saying, Scientology's done a pretty decent job of hiding them and making them unknown, despite the fact that so many staff members and Sea organization members have left, like Jesse Prince. Have you seen Mark Bunker over on his channel at Xenu TV brought to 4K a whole bunch of Jesse Prince interviews and whatnot?
No.
He just did that recently.
Yeah, we picked up the Shrinking World of L. Ron Hubbard from him, with his permission, because he's 4K'd that. What an incredible man. Never been involved in Scientology. Just heard about Lisa McPherson and said, I need to do something about this. Moved to Clearwater and as he's just occasionally, and Tony Ortega's another, like, he's got no axe to grind. He just went, no, this is bad. Somebody should be saying something about this. And I doubt that he's made very much money doing it, frankly. I've never made any money doing it. So. But there are, Steve Kinane, the Australian journalist who wrote Fair Game, which is a brilliant book. Again, a history of Scientology. But just a really decent human being. I got to know him reasonably well while he was working on that. And it's so rare. There are, so many people in this world. We're desperate to make a living. We're desperate to look after our families. We haven't got time to pick up causes and do anything about that. And there's certainly no money in it if anybody out there is thinking of.
Yeah, kind of the opposite sometimes.
Yeah, mainly.
Deanna Ross says John McMaster's called L. Ron Hubbard old fatty.
Yeah, John McMaster. John Sanborn was my favorite. John ran the publications for Hubbard from 1954 to 1978. And then one day he was asked to put another huge check into an L. Ron Hubbard account, and he went, I've been living on $5 a week all this time. I'm done. And he walked. When I interviewed him, he said, I call him Tubby. I never call him anything but Tubby. Tubby Hubbard. So yeah, I mean, and John McMaster, I sort of dug him out. He disappeared, and I found him in 1984, and I did 2 interviews with him. I must put those up in Patreon or somewhere, because I did 2-3 hour interviews with this guy.
Yeah.
And he was such a hero. So many people I met were like, oh, John was just fantastic. He exemplified what Scientology was. And I met this broken down alcoholic, not the super being, who was, self-involved. But he nonetheless had a lot of information about Ron Hubbard. And the way that, he joined the Sea organization, he was Scientology's ambassador to the United Nations, did tours around the world. And he said how upset Hubbard would get that he got more applause than Hubbard did. That was definitely, and he's one of many people who told me about finding Hubbard sitting in the corner crying because he was so upset about something, that things we are not allowed to see, things we were not meant to see, that are covered up. But
they've done, I mean, really, when it comes to covering things up, I feel that Scientology is incredibly skilled.
mm,
And what just really, when I look at all this and I just see the same cycle happening over and over again, even though L. Ron Hubbard's not even here, the way this idea, the whole belief that children are big beings in little bodies, which has led to nothing but further abuse of children. Even, like we were saying, even Leah Remini was a Sea Org member child at 13. My sister was 14. I joined staff at 15. That indoctrination when you're in a Scientology family starts really young. And I've been thinking, it's like, is that like, how do they maintain these secrets so well when there's so many former staff members and former Sea Org members? And I think it's because of the lengths they go to dead agent or to try to spread rumors and basically make somebody who's sharing their experience in Scientology or someone they consider a critic by just trying to fair game them and shut them up. I mean, they wouldn't do it if it didn't work to a degree. I don't think it's working so much anymore because of the internet, because now look at what's happening. Even just in the last few years since Scientology and the Aftermath came out, Leah Remini's show, how many stories of former members of the Sea Org coming forward and saying what's happening? Do you think now with the internet and the ability we have to bring back so many of these stories, to bring back what Mark Bunker's doing with those interviews,
Yep.
bringing back those interviews with Jesse Prince? You talk to so many people and you have I hope that starts to make a difference in turning the tide. I feel like civilization and society understands, most of them, that Scientology is a family destroying human trafficking cult. But it is amazing to me how Scientology today can still safe point themselves with elected leaders and law enforcement who just think that, no, they're just the bee's knees. And that's why I think it's so important to do these chats with you and to get this information out as far and wide as possible, what the truth is about L. Ron Hubbard and Scientology, and how these Scientologists, and especially the staff members and Sea Org members, are suffering and have suffered for decades.
yeah, there's a Ron Hubbard statement, which I have frequently returned to. When you become too incredible, you become invisible. And so the story with the R word about his child that I told earlier, when I tell that story, I always feel this can't be true.
Yeah.
How could anybody do something this monstrous?
Well, I felt that when you said it. I mean, I had not heard that before. Can you specify if it was one of his male or female children?
Female.
Okay.
I mean, Captain Bill Robertson, it wouldn't be possible to meet anybody more fanatically devoted to L. Ron Hubbard than Captain Bill. I knew Captain Bill well. He lived in East Grinstead for 8 months after I'd left. And as I drifted away, he kept coming to see me because he was determined to re-recruit me. And I was still producing Reconnection magazine. I was interviewing for the book. And one day he said to me that he had been with Ron Hubbard on 2 occasions when he had done something that would make anybody leave Scientology. And I kept pestering him as the weeks went by. What was that? And he would never tell me. But there's somebody who was so completely and utterly, I mean, you can't be more dedicated. He used to, you see other stories that nobody's going to believe. The 6'4" guy who rode a Harley Davidson, and when the woman he'd been staying with in East Grinstead was a good friend of mine, and she was a beautiful woman in her 50s, very elegant French woman. And one day I came down to have my breakfast, and she was sat crying in my kitchen, and I said, what's wrong? And she told me she'd been living with Captain Bill for 8 months and they'd never had sex. And that was that's a bit odd. And on a Saturday, they would go to an outsized woman's clothing store and he would point to the items he wanted. And then at 8 o'clock at night, when he didn't have other appointments, he would stand in front of a full-length mirror in a ball gown with high heels on, 6'4", Harley Davidson, big guy, Bill. He would stand up and sing these songs. And the confirmation of this is that all of his sector operations bulletins telepathically received from L. Ron Hubbard on the mothership. L. Ron Hubbard was actually just outside San Luis Obispo at the time, but never mind, which is about the Markabians. And so there's a big section. Originally, Blue Sky was going to be about Captain Bill. And it just, I've got to explain Scientology first. Oh, no, I've got to explain how anybody would get involved in this. And Bill, in the end, was just like a paragraph. And the original manuscript was about him and this mad idea of the Markabians. That's all come back in the new book. We've got a whole chapter called Captain Bill and the Markabians. But I noticed that these telepathic messages were signed Astar Parmegian, something like that, Parmegian. And I said to him, he'd given me the screenplay Revolt in the Stars, L. Ron Hubbard, who had said, you will die within 2 days of being exposed to the OT3 material, then wrote a screenplay about it. It's like, oh, okay, there's something this is a bit of an explanation here. And in that screenplay, there's a character called Astar Parmegian. And there's a character called Rawl. Do you have Rawl plugs in the US? When you drill a hole in a wall and you put a little thing in it, it's called a Rawl plug here, spelt the same way, R-A-W-L. So L. Ron Hubbard, 75 million years ago, was Rawl, fighting against Xenu and the oppressors. And his girlfriend was Astar Parmegian. And Bill was signing off these bulletins as Astar Parmegian.
What? Okay, so while he was in Scientology?
Well, he was creating the Ronzorg, the free zone, while he was issuing these things. So basically, this is 1984.
So they were issued, though, in the free zone. So the independent Scientologists practicing Scientology outside of the church. He was writing those bulletins and saying...
Well, no, he was telepathically receiving them. And the ones that he wrote, he signed Astar Parmegian. He didn't sign them Captain Bill. And he did, I think there's a written thing in the bulletins themselves that identifies him as Astar Parmegian, but it doesn't tell you that Astar Parmegian is female or that he dressed up in girls' clothes and sang songs to Ron Hubbard.
So do you think that Captain Bill then thought in his past life that he was the lover of L. Ron Hubbard 75 million years ago when L. Ron Hubbard was battling Xenu?
Yeah, and I think that at least one of the two things that he witnessed L. Ron Hubbard do may have had something to do with that and may have been a way that he bonded Bill to him by doing something gay, probably. Am I allowed to say gay? Is that
you can say gay? Word? Yeah, gay's totally fine. Yeah. Wow.
And, I mean, Jerry Armstrong, when we were in Toronto, he suddenly said when they were working on he's working with Omar Garrison on the biography of Hubbard, that they called Hubbard Johnny Goodbugger.
Good burger?
Bugger.
Bugger.
Am I allowed to say bugger?
Yeah, like that bugger.
Yes, well, as in somebody who has sex with.
Oh, is that what a bugger is?
No, you didn't know that. Okay, there we go.
No.
Yes, it derives from the word Bulgarian or Bogomil,
okay,
and was a common insult against the Bogomil Protestant sect that they were all gay and catamites and sodomites, that kind of thing. So the lead character in Battlefield Earth is Johnny Goodboy Tyler.
Yeah.
There was a version of it which actually had Hubbard's head on this great big muscly body on the cover, which was my personal favorite. And so they started calling Hubbard Johnny Goodbugger. And Jerry explained in one of the talks, this is because they'd got letters that Hubbard had written when he was 16 about how much he liked the practice of buggery.
Which is homosexuality, gay sex.
It is quite literally having sex in the bottom of a person. Okay. Yes. Buggery.
And you mentioned that before. We've talked about how L. Ron Hubbard had same-sex relationships or activity. And that, what was it, like the first 7 clears in Scientology were gay?
The queer clears, and that was expression. I when we talked about it, a set designer in Hollywood rang me up. It was about 1995, and he'd found my number, and he said he'd never understood why it was that 7 of the first real clears, and Hubbard was declaring real clears from 1950 onwards, but this is the 1965 batch headed by John McMaster, how 7 out of 10 of them were gay. And it was sort of like, well, you don't really need me to explain that to you, do you? He wanted people that he could blackmail. And as you know, homosexuality had only very recently become legal, let alone anything else, in the UK and the US. And you know, homophobia sadly is still with us to this day. It was a way of getting them to shut up if they caused any trouble. And I mean, John McMaster denied to me. I've got a 7-page handwritten letter from John, because after I first interviewed him, there was a group in LA called the Gay Theatre Association. And so I wrote to him and said, you know,
Gay Theta.
the Gay Theatre Association, and which is great. Why not? So I wrote to him and said, you know, these people, it's fine to be gay. And I got this 7-page handwritten letter saying, I am not a homosexual. How dare you? You know, it was still that sensitive to him. Then I was a year or so later, I was in Sun Valley, you know, in LA, and greater LA. And the woman whose house we were staying in said that she'd had to kick John McMaster out about 6 months before, because she'd got 2 young daughters who might have come home from high school while he was running around her house naked chasing his boyfriend. But he wasn't gay.
So that was John
McMaster.
John McMaster, the
world's first real queer.
So do you think the first real queer? Do you think that the first 7 clears who were homosexual, are you saying that you think they were just put up to the activity as a way to blackmail them, or that they were actually gay and then they
were actually gay and they called themselves the queer clears? I'm not calling them that. That was their own term, and they thought that was funny. John McMaster toured the world with his secretary, Colin. And who knows? But it was, Hubbard had something that he could blackmail them for. I mean, in the end, McMaster in this organization was overboarded and thrown off the ship from sort of 25 feet high, higher than high diving board, all of that stuff. And he was left in the water for 2 hours, and he'd broken his collarbone on the way down. And they just left him there screaming for 2 hours. And that was him done with L. Ron Hubbard. As soon as he could, he got off the ship and came back to England and developed a great fondness for alcohol during the time I knew him.
Wow.
But
it's just so crazy. And you can, you know, you fast forward that, it's like this whole history kind of repeats itself to a degree. But the cover up, the history of the cover up, that's just what blows my mind. Because if the everyday Scientologist really knew the truth about L. Ron Hubbard and who he was and the truth about what he did, they would, like that person in your story, they would just stop being Scientologists. Because if the basis, if the beginning, if the source of all the Scientology is corrupt, disgusting, alleged, you know, pedo, alleged incest, I mean, nobody would support that. And
well,
I've
hopefully.
often wondered, like, how much Scientology management knows about the truth today.
Well, Jerry Armstrong left in 1981 and just wanted to get away and be quiet, but they would not leave him alone. They would not leave him alone, so they forced stuff into public. But what Jerry's last act had been to say, you know, all of these stories he told about himself, the explorer, the war hero, the nuclear physicist, the guy who studied with gurus in China, India, Tibet, and Mongolia. None of them are true. Writing the movie Dive Bomber, doing this, doing that. None of these stories is true. We should put the record straight. And he found himself out on the street. There was absolutely no interest. So, and other people, I mean, I became close to Robert Vaughan Young and Stacey Young, Stacey Brooks, Stacey
Well, why do
Minton.
you think, John, why was there no reaction or something done, even when Jerry Armstrong found out what he did, and he was pretty much, they've been trying to silence him ever since?
Mm.
I mean, do you think they just didn't believe it when he was like, hey, here's all the things I'm finding out about Owen Hubbard. This is actually true. Do you think the remaining Scientology Seward members were just like, no, that's not true? Or they knew it was true, but like, hey, we're trying to cover that up. It's easier in ways for Scientology to cover up L. Ron Hubbard's history because so much time has passed. And it's a lot of, well, this person says that, but this person says this.
Yeah, I mean, there's always going to be groupthink that when we were in Scientology, we saw things that were wrong. We saw things that we questioned, red flags.
Yeah.
And we downplayed those things because we believed in the greater good. We believed that when we see, all of the significant churches, the Catholics, well, actually, that's unfair. I don't know about the Orthodox, but the Anglican Church here, the Methodist Church here, Baptist churches, the Jehovah's Witnesses, they have all covered up SA. And I get it that you kind of go, well, the church is a powerful force for good. We don't want the reputation of the church staining, so that so we'll protect it. And I think that's normal. Police officers do it. People in lawyers do it. People bind together, and there's that group thing that says, well, what we're doing is more important than that. Politicians most certainly do it. And so I think there's that natural thing. But I think the important question is David Miscavige, because there isn't anybody else significant in Scientology. It doesn't matter what anybody else thinks in Scientology. This great story, maybe you saw this one, about when the hurricanes hit Florida, that somebody attested that they'd heard David Miscavige tell the hurricane to go away, and the hurricane had apologized to him.
What? Who said this?
It was some Scientologist. I can't remember.
Story.
I can't remember where I read it. It was probably Tony Ortega or somewhere like that. But it was like, and what language does a hurricane speak? It's like, so this, we've got to kind of animism where everything is alive, and David Miscavige suddenly has these superpowers. If David Miscavige had any superpowers, you wouldn't be watching this now. It's that simple. He would have stopped this from happening. He's just a pipsqueak. He's just a midshipman. Didn't even have a rank. He wasn't even an officer in the Sea Org when he took power, usurped power. He has no authority. Why do people follow him? Because he's a bully.
He's a bully, yeah.
Yeah, he shouts and hits people. The amount of people who've told me about being punched and knocked down. I mean, Mike Rinder, it happened to him frequently. Jefferson Hawkins, it's happened to him. And it's been his way. He's a thug. He's an awful thug. So what matters is when Jerry Armstrong said, look, we need to correct this. We need to tell the truth.
Yeah.
And what did Miscavige think? Miscavige thought, don't think that's really safe. Now, this is at a point, in fact, back then when Miscavige didn't have power. And in fact, the head of the CMO would have been Diane Vogading, DD Riesdorf, who I haven't been in touch with her for decades, but she was very helpful to me early on. So those people back then would have said, this can't possibly be true. It's that simple. It cannot be true. And therefore, we don't have time to look at it. And therefore, we'll give $270,000, $280,000 to Omar Garrison not to publish a biography that is based upon this fantastic archive of documents. So say I interviewed Shona Foxness, who worked in the archive. I interviewed Robert Vaughan Young and Stacey. They worked. Robert was the head of the archive after Jerry left. So I've interviewed the people who had access to these documents. I've also seen a fair amount of the documents that we're not meant to see because I've known collectors. So, for example, there's a 1938 letter which we call the Skipper letter, and it leaked out of Scientology. And it leaked because they were trying to date it. They knew it was 1938, but they didn't know it was actually in August 1938. And there's this letter, bits of which I reprint in Scientology Cult of Greed, where Hubbard says he doesn't believe in immortality.
Really?
1938. Only the painted canvas, the barred note, hard graphite. It says graphite in the letter. I think he meant granite. And the written word. And he talks about making Napoleon look like a punk. And he's going to be remembered. Even if all the books are destroyed, he's going to be remembered. That is my only goal. I am going to smash my name into history.
Well, I guess he did it, but like for all the wrong reasons.
Yeah, and who cares?
Cult leader.
Yeah, I mean, who cares? There was a Paulette Orsley, Paulette Maher, and Paulette Cohen. She refused to talk to me when I was interviewing David Mayo in 1986. I was at the Palo Alto Center. I had two-week periods there and interviewed David and various other people. She wouldn't even acknowledge me. And I was there again in 88 and I saw her and she exploded at me. You're giving him what he wanted. You're making him famous. And I'm going, you're auditing people. What are you talking about?
Oh, she felt that you were making L. Ron Hubbard famous by writing your books.
Yeah. So we should all remain silent about Hitler and Stalin because the world would be a better place if we didn't know about them. Yeah. Who cares about fame for dead people? She was right. He wanted apotheosis, deification. That's what it's all about. It's about stopping Jesus and making Ron it's funny because Marty Rathbun, while he was still persona grata, he wrote this thing saying that he'd realized that Hubbard was trying to be deified. And so I wrote him an email and said, yeah, if you read my book written in 1990, you'll find that there's a chapter about that.
Yeah.
Duh. And I didn't get a reply. But that is what it's about. It's about stopping Jesus and making Ron Hubbard into God. And kind of that, I don't remember that bit. Where in the millions of Hubbard words did it say something about that being the objective that we were seeking?
Never. That's the thing that I think is even more what makes Scientology so much more evil than I think sometimes people realize is the fact that not even key leaders in Scientology, I think at times have known and understood what it was, what L. Ron Hubbard's actual goals were, what he actually was trying to do. They don't know that. So they just perpetuate these lies and it continues on and nobody does anything to correct it. And if you try to do anything to correct it, like Jerry Armstrong, then look what happened, right? Or Jesse Prince. And Scientology just goes at you. Or John Atack.
Yeah, I've heard of him.
Yeah, exactly. It's over and over and over again. I think today, though, with the internet and YouTube and the ability that people have to go on to just about any platform and share their truth, the information can spread faster. When you talk about like that letter, some of the letters or the things that you've seen, can you imagine if that was in the day of the internet where you can snap a picture with your phone and boom, it can be out to millions of people? It's much harder to keep these secrets. I got a couple questions here for you. First, does it matter to you? Not to me.
Aloha.
Aloha for being a member for 11 months. Are you aware of a Frank and Mary that were on the ship with L. Ron Hubbard? They are still alive. They helped write the operating Thetan levels.
No, and by all means, let me know. Of course, none of the operating Thetan levels that were written aboard ship are still used. OT3 was written before the ship sailed, and the old OT4, 5, 6, and 7, which are in fact just the creation of human ability. I hate to, the 1954 book. That's all you got, really. So they would have been compiled out of that material. But then in 1982, New Era Dianetics were operating Thetans, knots, and then snots, solo knots. Came along as developed by David Mayo, though not in fact what was released. What was released as NOTs or OT 5, 6, and 7 is not what David Mayo ran as processes on L. Ron Hubbard, curing his annual fit of bronchial fever. I interviewed David at some length and bothered quite a few people who'd paid money to do the OT levels, because David said it was nothing to do with body thetans. So, but yeah, I'd be very interested to find out about Frank and Mary and whatever they did do. And, you know, I am no longer the historian of Scientology. I'd rather hope that somebody else would do that. And I know by coming on here, it makes it sound as if and having, you know, writing a new book, I actually spent 17 years not reading anything about Scientology. That's how long I've been doing this. And then came back in 2013 because I realized it's a worm. It's like an RFK brainworm that people don't realize it's affecting the way they think. It's affecting the way they believe, and it's affecting the way they behave. And it's really quite easy to undo. That's the thing that's most frustrating to me, that we see so much. It's like, you know, Kubler-Ross and the idea of getting over grieving. And the first stage is denial. It didn't happen to me. Scientology was not a problem for me at all. I'm absolutely fine. And then after that, you get anger. And I fear that the majority of people after Scientology are either in denial, they just walk away and it didn't do anything to me, or they're still really upset. And as you said earlier, they've got every reason to be upset as to what was done to them. But to get through that, and to kind of digest this material, and my argument is very much that to have had this experience, once you've digested it, once you've integrated it, gives you the superpowers. It actually, not, I'm afraid, the OT powers, but it does give, it can give compassion, it can give humility, and those are true superpowers, so that you can look at other people and help them. 10 years ago, I founded this thing called the Open Minds Foundation. And the idea was to take people who are experts on cults and point them at other things. So one of the projects along the way that I was involved in was a woman, a psychiatrist who was doing a master's degree in the psychology of coercive control. And she came to me and she said, I think that people who've done exit counseling interventions with cult members would probably know quite a lot about how to de-radicalize people, terrorists. And I said, yes, I've been thinking that since the 1990s, since before 9/11, and I can't get anybody to listen to me. And then you find out that de-radicalization is being done in very much the way that deprogramming was done in the 1970s, which is very bad, very wrong, very stupid, and doesn't work. So I thought, well, bring together this group of people and we will point ourselves outwards. And I anticipated that lots of healed, thriving survivors from Scientology would go, yeah, we want to, all recovery is great, but prevention, John, yeah, you know, an ounce of prevention is worth 17 tons of recovery. I thought people would just come running out to help me. Nobody. So I came to the conclusion that really, if having had this experience, you don't want then to help other people overcome it, there's something badly wrong. And it says this really is a very damaging and dangerous situation. And again, so many people, they want to hate current Scientologists rather than going, they're the victims. David Miscavige, even though he should be locked up for what he's doing, but he is the victim. He grew up in this. He's never known anything else. He didn't get an education. He was 13 when he got funneled into auditor training. And so he doesn't know anything. He's not informed and lives in this. You know, my thing is that we don't live in the world. We live in our imagination of the world, not how we imagine the world to be, but the imagination of the world. So we live in our own interpretation of the world. And it means that we miss a great deal because we're triggered, because we're re-stimulated by things, because we can't just sit back and take information in. We can't pass information properly. And if we could teach the next generation how to recognize human predators like Ron Hubbard, how to recognize the symptoms of such people, how to spot what fake news really is, and how to take propaganda apart, then the world would be a better place.
Mm-hmm.
I've been trying for decades to get the funding to do this. There's no interest. The Billy Club, the super rich, they're busy doing something else. But the idea of teaching all of our kids how to say no, you know, how to be able to report abuse,
Yeah.
you
Yeah,
know,
exactly.
rather
Don't
than just being caught up in the echo chambers and
Mhm.
scurrying down the rabbit holes,
And then
which seem to
hide
be taken
it
away with.
because it's better for Scientology, so to protect it. There was a Liz Gale's got a question. Is there a chance of David Miscavige being a CIA plant?
What a lovely idea. And hello, Liz. It's nice to see you. Um, I don't think so, because okay, there's this bizarre passage in Science of Survival, which I happen to have a copy of. It's amazing, isn't it, what you find on your bookshelves? I was given this copy of this book for being the best field staff member at Birmingham Mission, and you can see there's not very much left of it.
Yeah.
But in this book,
Well, I love this. Listen to this. Adam says, when it comes to Scientology, a propagander can thwart the propaganda. That's right. Google it. Google it. Today, we can Google it. I get back then, right? What are you going to do? You only had people to listen to. But today we have the internet and ChatGPT, and we know the truth.
Propagate and propagandas. This is Science of Survival, published in 1951. There is another form of hypnotism which falls between the surgical operation and straight hypnotism without physical pain. This form of hypnotism has been a carefully guarded secret of certain military and intelligence organizations. It is a vicious war weapon and may be of considerably more use in conquering a society than the atom bomb. This is no exaggeration. The extensiveness of the use of this form of hypnotism in espionage work is so wide today that it is long past the time when people should have become alarmed about it. Now, what's interesting about this is the only mention until 1975, I think, of the CIA mind control operation. In 1951. So how did he know about it? Well, it just so happens that the first program was not MK Ultra. It was in US Navy intelligence. It was called Operation Bluebird, and it started, I think, in 1949. This is 1951, so he's not probably talking about MK Ultra, but he is aware that the US military are developing mind control techniques, and that's true. We know that's true. So there are various possibilities here. Was Dianetics set up as a government operation? Was it a way of finding out how to entrap a group of people? Is the whole of Scientology actually a part of MK Ultra? It's possible.
mean, to go down this rabbit hole a little bit here,
Yeah.
I think it makes sense, because to my whole point of what makes me crazy and looking at this history of Scientology staff members and Sea Org members and the dedication that people put into this, and then the unwillingness to expose it or accept that L. Ron Hubbard could have done even a fraction of the things that you've talked about. What else would be the reason? It's like, I get control or money, but it just seems to be, in my opinion, like that doesn't even fully explain it to me, because it's so crazy. It's so insidious. It's so dangerous. And then also maybe that explains why it's still around. Why can't we get rid of Scientology?
Yeah. Well, why is it that governments faltered and didn't. Why isn't there legislation? I don't think Scientology should be banned, and I went to Germany and argued against politicians there, and eventually agreed with them that what they were banning was Scientologists couldn't be part of the civil service. They couldn't be public servants because they had a duty to Scientology and they would report on Scientology. And we found that out. That has happened. But I've always advocated against trying to ban it. But to regulate certain things, should you be allowed to volunteer yourself as a slave? Or should there be minimum wage laws that apply? Should there be health and safety laws that apply even to monks and nuns? And a friend of mine actually made an inquiry into this about monasteries and found out that, yes, they do have all sorts of limits in, so that these people are protected.
Yeah.
Why aren't there laws about this? Why are the human trafficking laws not being applied to Scientology? Because it very evidently does practice human trafficking.
Yeah, exactly. And we've known for decades. So again, you're
Mark
right.
and Claire Headley tried desperately to do something about this, and they really put work in to do something about this, and the FBI just backed off. So is this corruption at the government level, or is this because Scientology was a mind control experiment? Certainly as a mind control experiment, my interest has been the history of Scientology, the history of Hubbard, but psychologically, why does Scientology work? And why are so few ex-Scientologists actually interested in understanding that?
What do you mean when you say, why does Scientology work? What do you mean?
Why do people become enslaved? What is it?
Why does it succeed in creating slaves and people who are being mind controlled?
Yeah. And why aren't people who've escaped from that slavery interested to know precisely why it works? And which has been a huge part of my work in the last 20 years.
Yeah.
Understanding, 30 years, the psychology of this. And so I've done a lot of work on the Chinese thought reform program, understanding how that worked. And you find that for the most part, it didn't. Once you left China, it was gone. There were no Manchurian candidates made. The same with MK Ultra, 160, 146, I think, operations. Some of them really horrible, most of them just, fluff, who cares? But psychological research in the United States was almost entirely funded by the military, nearly 100%, from 1947 to 1963. So a lot of the major work, like the work that Philip Zimbardo did, he admits he was being hired by the US Navy to find these things out. You want to find these things out. Because if the Russians have got these techniques, if the Chinese have got these techniques, but the point is those techniques didn't work. That ultimately, yes, you can make a one-child nation with, tens of thousands of women being forced into terminations. You can make a culture that accepts that. And there's an incredible documentary called One Child Nation about that, which I recommend to everybody. If you're squeamish, keep away. But how is it that Scientology reinforces the belief system so that even after people have left, even after they say that they're no longer in any way believes in Scientology, an outsider watching them can say, yeah, but you still behave like a Scientologist. What is that? And to spring that for me was, I had to understand, how has this happened?
Yeah, exactly.
And so again, I wrote a book called Opening Our Minds, which is about that. It's about the processes. And Scientology is not the only group in the world. It's one of thousands of groups that use these techniques. But nobody uses them all like Scientology. The communist brainwashing doesn't come close to the effectiveness. You can make, as L. Ron Hubbard said, we have ways of making slaves here. As L. Ron Hubbard said, we can brainwash faster than the Russians, 20 seconds to total amnesia. You won't remember what we did to you.
Wow. Do you think that if it were true, let's just say hypothetically that Scientology was this whole mind control experiment, do you think L. Ron Hubbard knew about it or he was just being used as part of it?
I think there's a differentiation between an asset and an agent that's made in the intelligence community. He was not an agent. I don't personally think he was an asset. I think that the reason he knew about this operation is because of his great friend Robert Heinlein. Robert Heinlein had full security clearance right into the 70s. He was given access to the Star Wars material, you know, lasers in the sky stuff, not the movie, before Ronald Reagan saw it. Right. So Heinlein is a very close friend of Hubbard's. It's said that the character Jubal Harshaw in Stranger in a Strange Land is based on Hubbard. And certainly the ideas in that novel are familiar to anybody who's in Scientology. So Heinlein very probably knew about Operation Bluebird and told Hubbard about it. And it's that simple. But it is nice to think about all the spook stories that could be going on there. I think the other thing is that Hubbard is too self-involved to be safe in terms of, you know, an intelligence agency. Also, let me yet again, and for the thousandth time, say L. Ron Hubbard never worked for Navy intelligence. That is a red herring. He was an intelligence officer, which means he censored letters, crew letters, and he did talks on how to recognize enemy shipping and planes. That's the duty of an intelligence officer. He was never involved in espionage work. Though people love that story, and I've taken apart Fletcher Prouty's nonsense about that long since.
Yeah. John, what is your, I know does it matter to you, not to me, was looking for your email address. Do you have a public email address?
Well, pretty much people can, if you go to the YouTube channel, John Atek Family and Friends, there's an about button, and if you click that, then you can email my assistant Spike, and she may pass it on. Let me warn anybody who wants to write to me that there are quite a lot of people who want to write to me, and I cannot. It's like after I'd written Blue Sky, the relief at not having to explain the 6-hour monologues that Blue Sky is to people. It's like, go and get those answers. And when you need to do your doctorate in this subject and have read the 500 articles I've written and the several books, then come and ask me questions. And, I'm happy to do that. And, if somebody needs help, I'll try and help them. But believe me, my life is, I'm nearly 70 and I'm retired and I'm not making any money.
Well, I'm glad you're still writing the books and these are coming out. Adam says Hubbard was too much of an adult to be CIA or ONI. What's ONI?
Office of National Intelligence. I'm not sure, actually.
That makes sense. Linda Lou is a great comment. I'm still perplexed that those seeing David Miscavige's actions don't revolt against him. I understand his status, but still doesn't commute to me. What would you say to that? In my mind, it's more about, they don't know the whole picture, but even the people who see his actions, do they think they just, like the amount of people who are still there who witnessed David Miscavige physically assaulting Mike Rinder or Jeff Hawkins or a host of other people still remain, some of them.
Yeah. Unfortunately, you can say the same thing about many groups.
Yeah.
For example, the Waffen-SS, and there were 1.25 million people in the Waffen-SS who were obedient to Himmler. And while many people were not willing to murder on command, many people were. And you also have people become trained. One of the most awful incidents in the history of the United States is the training of the Contra-Revolution that for Nicaragua. So Nicaragua democratically elected a government, having lived under a tyrant who would feed his opponents to zoo animals and watch them being eaten. Somoza.
Wow.
So he is ousted, but he's a US client. So the US, under Ronald Reagan and George Bush Sr., ran a training program for the Contra-Revolution. It was run by the Green Berets in Virginia. And in this program, they would say to people, Is there anybody here who disagrees with torture? Somebody puts their hand up and they torture them. And they're training in torture. These people are then sent back to Nicaragua and they are told that they are to the R word, nuns. They are to castrate men because, as US military policy, damaging somebody is more effective than killing them, because then the community morale will go down and the community will have to look after the injured person. This was used in Vietnam.
Wow.
With cluster bomb units, which were aimed at children. They were aimed at harming children so that they'd have to be cared for. So you've got this vicious military psychology, and you go, well, how do people go along with this? And it's a matter of groupthink. It's a matter of obedience training. There's an ex-Scientologist who was an L. Ron Hubbard aide called Ira Chaleff. He's a very good friend of mine. He has devised what he calls courageous followership, which all of the US military are now trained in, 1 million people trained in it. He's also wrote a wonderful book called Intelligent Disobedience. And all parents should teach this to their children. Teach your children to say, I don't understand, please explain that. Or, no, I'm not going to do that. Or, we have a culture which is slavish. We have a culture where people do comply and they do go along. Just last week, I was reading a review of a book in New Scientist about how hard it is to say no in our culture. And the author was saying, actually, you'll do yourself more harm when you get home and you realize you should have said no than if you had. But it's so embarrassing to be the one who stands up. And I've learned to do this. I became that person. I am the poster child for no. I stood up with Scientology and said, you can't do this to people. No. But there was very little support for that attitude. While the independents, and I was protecting the independents, even though I didn't believe anymore. I helped to found the independents and then I left within a few weeks. But the independents were interested in me because I would protect them from harassment, but more generally protecting the society from this kind of predation. And this is where we're going. This is where, don't want to get into US news too much, but my God, what are you people doing? The democracy, remember that? I had somebody when I was criticizing the good president you have now last year who came on and said, you don't understand, we're not a democracy, we're a republic. It's like, oh God, have you got an education system, But we are seeing authoritarianism take over in our world. We're seeing people go, well, I don't know, so I'll trust this person who says they know. And now the people who say they know actually have a pathological condition. Because none of us know. Certainty is not something that genius has. Certainty is something that we stupid people have. And so going, I don't know how to get out of this. 45% of medical doctors joined the Nazi party.
In Germany?
In Germany and Austria, 45% of medical doctors, among the professions, they were the largest number. And when you look at some of the things they did, like the Action T4 program, where they sterilized perhaps 300,000 people forcibly. How did doctors do that? How do they justify that? And it's like, well, through twisted logic, by taking their intelligence and using it to buttress their stupidity, which is what we all tend to do. We justify stupid things. So, I'm not an advocate for critical thinking in and of itself. I think redefining the word reasoning or logic and calling it critical thinking has not tremendously helped. We need critical thinking, but until such time as we understand how emotional we are, Mao Zedong said, the subjective becomes the objective. So you tell somebody a story and then you tell them it's true. And we're talking here about a man who suffered from quite a number of sexually transmitted diseases, who was given a new girl to have sex with every day of his life. Mao Zedong.
Who is that?
Mao Zedong, the chairman of the Chinese Communist Party. He odd a new woman every day. Mussolini, 4 women a day, and it lasted 10 minutes and they'd be covered in bruises. Why do people support tyrants? Because we're not brave enough, because we need to learn courage. And that's, that's not easy when the world is scary. And so you've got David Miscavige, thug, kicking people, punching people, forcing them to lick the carpet, this kind of thing, degrading them for their sexual practices. That every week there's a muster at the HQ where whoever's done the grossest thing sexually has to come on the stage and be told about it. And so the Mark Yeager, Guillaume Lefebvre story, let's not get into that.
Yeah.
That just to humiliate, abuse, and belittle people, and people, it becomes the way you live. And anybody that does object is thrown out, got rid of. So they're not spreading this thing. I talked with a woman who was 20 years in the SEALG. She worked for Miscavige. She was at Golden Era, and she was an artist. And she told me that she would normally have 2 hours sleep a night on a bit of foam that was under her desk. 2 hours sleep a night. A good night's sleep was 5 hours. Now, the reality is, under 6 hours of sleep a night, your body starts to break down. Your brain stops functioning properly. You become confused. You don't know whether it's day or night. You're just desperately trying to get through the day. That's the condition for soldiers in wartime. But that's the condition for SEALG members, that being reduced to obedience, to slavery, so that what's the choice you're going to make? If you object, what's going to happen to you? If you just go along with it, you might get enough beans and rice to just about get by.
Gosh, that's true. That's really true. It just kind of beats people down. And then I can only imagine that if you witness some of these things in Scientology, I guess I could see how, rather than standing up to it and trying to stop it, you're just trying to keep your head down and get through, because otherwise you become a target.
Yeah, and you still believe that this is the only salvation for humanity. And I've now spoken with members of hundreds of different groups, and they all believe that they're the only salvation for humanity. And most of them believe that it's got to happen now. The whole agonized future of every man, woman, and child on this planet depends on what we do here and now in Scientology. And I'm kind of, it's going to be agonized? You're telling us it's going to be agonized, the future run?
That was weird.
That's not very nice. What about the whole pleasant future depends upon what we do here and now?
Yeah.
And you go, oh, no, I see what you mean. Yeah, we are going to be agonized if Scientology takes over.
Well, I cannot wait till your book comes out, if Scientology took over the world.
If Scientology ruled the world. Nazi occultism, sex magic, space aliens, and the second coming, and how to stop it. If you feel like it.
When can we pre-order it?
I don't really know. I thought this will take me 3 weeks because I've done so many decades of research. I've got so many notes. It'll take me 3 weeks. That was in August. I'm just now coming to the end of it. I'm completely exhausted. So what I want to do is issue it as an audio book, an ebook, and a print book at the same time. So it's going to depend on whether Spike's going to get any sleep at all in the next few weeks. We're actually also working on an audio book of Let's Sell These People a Piece of Blue Sky.
Yeah.
Because Kindle have just come up with this new robot reading thing. Because Aaron, a couple of years ago, Aaron said to me, I'm not going to read Blue Sky. You've got to make an audio book. And it's like, do you have any idea what it's like reading 420 pages of bloody book? And I can't, my L. Ron Hubbard accent isn't necessarily good enough. Very good. Got that. Thank you.
Well, I cannot wait to see it. Northern Girl asked me a question. We were trying to remember. I did a video the other day, and there's something I was like, oh, you guys got to remind me to ask John Atack about that when he comes on. And now I can't remember. See, they're all trying to remember a recent video when you wrote down something that you needed to ask John during the talk. What was it? And I don't even know. I don't even know
Does
where
Scientology screw your memory up? Was that the question?
I will remember it because I know that. Well, I'll figure it out. I'm sure I'll find
You
it, and
will.
then we
You will.
will
I have every
do this
confidence
again.
in you, Natalie. Every
Um,
confidence.
Haggis Basher says, John, you sent me down a hole and I'm just coming back out of it.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah, there's a lot to learn. But thank you so much, John, for coming on again. We will be doing
great.
this again.
We will.
Rebel against Scientology. Hit the like, hit the subscribe. Head over to John Atack. In fact, I've got here too. Is this your website I got pulled up? Let's look. You can go to John's website as well, which you can get access to everything, his books, his blog, a gallery, resources, his YouTube channel. It's all on there, johnatack.co.uk. You can find him there. So do find him. Thank you, John.
Let me,
thank you for, go ahead.
Sorry, something that I meant to say. I made 1 million views on a video this weekend, finally. And it's a channel called Lad Bible, which was, I think, started by 2 16-year-olds, and they must be incredibly good at marketing. But we actually went past 1 million views, and there's no money in it for me, which is very annoying. But they've made some money from it, which is good. But it's recorded in a TV studio with 2 cameras and all the lights, and I look like death warmed up, which seems to be a popular look for me, it would seem. But the wonderful thought that 1 million people have been told something about Scientology, and all they did was they got a load of questions on cards, and I just read the questions out and gave answers. So don't go there, go to my channel. I need the views. But we made 1 million, so
yay. That is awesome. That's wonderful. I did see that. I really enjoyed it.
Oh, good.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, John. I hope you all get out and have an amazing cult-free day.
Yeah, enjoy.